Hey everybody, it's Santina from Solo Female Van Life Lessons, and today I want to tell you about my experience doing a stand-up paddleboard for the first time. If you are someone who has never stand-up paddleboarded and you're curious about what it's like, this video might help you understand what it might be like for you before you decide whether you want to rent one and go out and try it for yourself or not. So you can see my hair is still wet. I stand-up paddleboarded on the Northeast River in Northeast Maryland today with my new friend Chris. She was in a kayak and we did have a good time. Now this was the time of year where it was 80 degrees by 10 o'clock in the morning, so it was quite warm. But I can tell you that I did take a dunk unintended in the Northeast River, and that was quite refreshing. So we used a company to rent our kayak and our stand-up paddleboard called Bay Venture Outfitters. And here's why I like this company. First of all, they were right on a very small portion of the Northeast River, actually a creek called the Lower Creek. And so it was a very calm, very light current on that creek, and it wasn't very large, but you could get out to the Northeast River, and we did. We paddled that a little bit as well. When we reserved our kayak and stand-up paddleboard, we went to, I believe it's Bay, let's see if I can find there, yeah, bayventureoutfitters.com, and they have a button to book now, and it was super easy to book my stand-up paddleboard and not very expensive. I believe it was about $35 for I'm not sure if it was for we did paddle for 2 hours. I'm not sure if it was $35 an hour or $35 for both hours. But the prices are probably going to vary anyway, so go ahead and check them out and see if that's something that you are willing to pay for, no matter how many hours you would like to go. So we got there at around 9:30 and we were paddling from 10 to noon. And I did, besides booking online, which we did in advance, probably maybe 2-3 weeks in advance, I did call them, and they were very good about answering all of my questions about renting from them and stand-up paddleboarding. Very customer service oriented. When we drove to their site on the Lower Creek, or maybe Mid Creek, I guess. I don't know what the creek is called. I'm looking at their map, which they provided to us. So they are located right here. You can see how small of a body of water that is. And then here is the actual Northeast River. But when we got there, it is a very small parking lot, but they had plenty of parking, and I parked in the shade. There were 2 employees there who helped us get prepared for our paddle boarding and kayaking experience, and they were very nice, very helpful, and yes, they do take tips. So they set us up with the paddleboard and kayak. They put it on their launch, and they gave us life vests. They did advise us to secure anything that could get wet. I had my backpacking camel, so I had 1.5 liters of water on my back, but I had removed everything else from my backpack camel, that could get wet and ruined. I was going to bring this iPhone with me only to be able to check the time in order to turn around in time. If you do stay out 10 minutes later, I believe, than your scheduled return time, they will charge you for another hour. So we had 2 hours. I was going to use my phone. I wrapped it in multiple Ziploc bags in order to prevent it from getting wet if I took a dunk. But at the last minute, the woman that I was with, Chris, had a watch. And so I decided not to bring it. And it was a good thing, because as we were paddling, I have no idea why, but all of a sudden it felt like my board tipped up in the front, and I started walking backwards and dunked right into the Northeast River. It was refreshing, but it was also a little scary because, number one, I have no idea what I did that could have caused that. Even if there were slight waves from a wake from some of the motor boats that are on the Northeast River. I thought I had my balance kind of down, but apparently not. And I did not expect to dunk, but yet I did. Now, I have pretty good balance normally, but about a year ago, I did experience a bout with vertigo, and I did have to go to physical therapy in order to get that corrected. My understanding is that there are crystals that are in your inner ear that can get dislodged and move and get tangled up in the cilia in your ear, and then you don't have good balance. I was practicing yoga, and I was getting up off the ground, and the room just spun. So after I went through physical therapy and did some exercises, it did appear to correct itself. And I feel like my balance is pretty good now, but maybe for some reason being on the water, maybe I'm still not 100%, and that's why I fell in. Anyway, I did have the tether around my ankle, so I didn't lose my board. But something that I do recommend you do when you get to a stand-up paddle board rental place is ask them, if you go off the board, how to get back on. I had not thought to ask them how to get back on the board, and I did struggle. They do give you the life preserver vest, which is quite bulky, and one of the things that I found was that it was very difficult to get my torso back on the board because my arm strength I just don't have very much arm strength, and I needed to be able to pull myself back on the board, which was challenging. When I got back to Bay Venture Outfitters, I asked them, how are you supposed to get back on this board? I did do it eventually, but I asked them, what's the appropriate way to get back on the board? And they did tell me that I pretty much guessed how to do it correctly. You pull up, there's a little handle on the board. You kind of use that for leverage. You put your hand on the far side of the board, and you pull up your torso as much as you can, and then you get a leg over it, and that will help you get back on the board. So I did intuitively figure out how to get on the board. It was just very awkward, and I needed arm strength, and just really didn't have much arm strength. I did have my glasses tethered with one of those cords, and I had tied that cord, whatever they're called, the eyeglass things, and I had actually wrapped that around. I had braided my hair, and I wrapped that around the braid with a elastic band so that I wouldn't lose my glasses in case that very loose lanyard for my glasses did kind of fly off. And my glasses did not fly off, but I did get water in my eyes, and I lost my hat. So I could have probably tethered my hat to that whole eyeglass lanyard as well. So something that you might want to consider when you go out. So I liked Bay Venture Outfitters. They were very customer service oriented. It is a very peaceful part of the creek, and it was a little daunting to go out into the Northeast River. It was very wide. You could see where there was a channel. The Northeast River does allow motorized boats, and we did actually paddle on the very small portion of the creek. We were paddling with some fishermen who did have motorized boats, and I did notice that there was some gasoline floating on the water, so it didn't seem very clean in certain places where there was blobs of gasoline, shiny gasoline floating on the water. But what's interesting is that that creek was also very clean in the sense that you could actually see through in many areas to the bottom, and you could see how deep the water was and the rocks underneath. Now, what I will tell you is that we happened to go at low tide. I didn't check the tides. I should have, because I wouldn't recommend paddling on that creek during a low tide. It was so low that I was bottoming out in multiple places. And as you go up this creek, and here's where we started, and we went this direction first. And as you get past this bridge, this becomes untravelable. It is maybe, I don't know, 4 or 6 inches of water at low tide. And the keel on my stand-up paddleboard must have been 6 or 8 inches. And then it's just full of rocks with algae on them. So I was able to get my paddleboard off of those rocks by just stepping into the creek and walking it, but the rocks are very uneven and very slippery because of that algae. So it was very difficult walking through those rocks with, I have water shoes. If you were barefoot, I think you would probably hurt your feet. So I do strongly recommend that you do get water shoes to stand up paddleboard. But other than that, it only took us probably an hour to get from Bay Venture all the way up here past this bridge, which had interesting acoustics, and then to the portion that you couldn't navigate anymore because it was too shallow. We paddled all the way back, and then we went this direction. And somewhere out here, there is a very interesting addition to a tree that apparently has lodged itself in the middle of the Northeast River. We paddled around that interesting feature. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because if you ever go there and you paddle out this way, it's a nice surprise. So we paddled around that tree, that feature, and then we came back. And literally it took us an hour and a half. We had plenty of time. We just sat in the shade for approximately 20 minutes and then paddled back to Bay Adventures and turned in our kayak and paddleboard. So it was in some ways easier than I thought to paddleboard, and in some ways it was harder than I thought. So it was very easy to do the paddling. I was worried that I needed a lot of arm strength in order to move the board through the water, but that was the easy part. It was very easy it didn't hurt my arms at all. My arms didn't get tired. We were out for 2 hours, probably paddling only for an hour and a half. And I thought that my arms would get really tired or sore, and I had neither of those. What was more difficult was getting from the kneeling position on the board to a standing position on the board. I found that very challenging. Maybe that's because of my recent bout with vertigo, and I'm maybe not 100% in my balance at this point. But this was obviously a very good board for beginners. It was very wide. It was fairly long. It seemed really stable. It only had the 1 6 or 8 inch, I'll call it a keel. I don't know what else to call it, a fin on the bottom that allows you to steer. It seemed very, very stable when I was sitting on it, when I was kneeling on it, but trying to get up from kneeling position to standing felt really wobbly. And then I was surprised that when I was standing on it, my legs were quivering as if they were working the whole time. And perhaps they were, and perhaps this is just me. Perhaps it's because I don't have a strong core that I couldn't keep my balance by using my core strength, but my legs were just kind of shaking the whole time. And it felt like they were working, like I was, in the middle of a leg workout. But it was doable. I mean, it wasn't horrible. It wasn't painful. It just felt kind of weird. So I did paddle sitting down some of the time, mostly because I wanted to put my feet in the water because it was so hot. But also because it is very tiring to be standing on that paddleboard. It uses a lot of energy to stay upright, which I expected when you're standing on the paddleboard that it's just like standing on the earth, and that your arms would be what was working the hardest, but it seemed like it was the opposite. My legs were working much harder than my arms were, even though I was paddling. So that was my experience paddleboarding. I was I wanted to try paddleboarding because I wanted to see if I wanted to purchase a blow-up paddleboard to take with me on all of our adventures. A lot of the people that we camp with here on Meetup, Solo Female Van Life Adventures, and East Coast Camping, we do tend to camp around water, and we do tend to do the water sports. We have a lot of people who have kayaks. And so I thought, well, if I get a blow-up inflatable paddleboard, I'll be able to go out with them but I'm not convinced that it's the sport for me. So I'm probably just going to rent once in a while. I will do it again. I did enjoy it. I'm just not sure that I want to do it every single time we get near a body of water. I would have been just as happy today actually going out and taking a dip and taking a swim because it was so incredibly warm. But it was a good experience to try paddleboarding. I do recommend you try it. And you know, if you don't enjoy it, you can always go in and return the paddleboard. I don't think that it was required a lot of, it wasn't a very risky sport. I mean, I did fall off, but I was in deeper water when I fell, which was good. If I had fallen when we were in shallow water, that could have hurt because I would have hit the stony bottom, and I might have, you know, twisted my ankle, or if I'd fallen on my back, that I would have hit bottom and that would have been uncomfortable. And that is the challenge, because you have that little keel. If you do run aground, which is easy to do on this part of the Northeast River, a lot of this is very shallow. Once you hit a ground and you stop, it does make you unstable on the board. So what I would recommend you do is ask, when you're renting, ask where the shallow parts are and stay away from them. It's actually better, in my opinion, if you're going to try standing up on the board and you might fall off, to fall off in the deeper water. My life preserver kept me up in the water. My friend Chris did have to retrieve my hat. It flew off my head. Thank you, Chris. But it was certainly safer, I think, in my opinion, to fall off in the deeper water than it would have been to fall off in the shallows. So that was my experience with stand-up paddleboarding. If you're curious about it, I hope that you do try it yourself. I think it's reasonable to rent a paddleboard and go out for an hour or two. Either one would have been fine with me. I could have stopped within an hour. I could have paddled for the full 2 hours. I probably wouldn't have done any more than that. But what I do like about the stand-up paddleboard is you can sit down on it, you can kneel down on it, you can stand up on it. So unlike a kayak where you are pretty much relegated to just sitting in it. What I can say is that Chris was in a kayak which seemed to draw a lot less. And so she didn't have as many times running aground as I did when we were in the shallow parts. But I think she did run aground at least once. But fun to get out on the water on a sunny day. I did have a hat on for keeping the sun out of my eyes, which was essential. I did have suntan lotion on as well. I did have water shoes, and I was fully prepared to get dunked and get wet, although I was surprised that I did. So I didn't have anything in my camel that would be ruined if it got wet. I did bring this map with us when we paddled, and I did put it in a plastic bag. And I can tell you that the little Ziploc bags, even though I sealed it up what I thought was completely all the way, it still did get damp in here. I also brought a snack of pistachio nuts that was in a Ziploc type bag, and that got wet as well. So don't assume, even if you put something in a couple of bags or 3 Ziploc bags, that they're going to remain waterproof. I'm really glad that I decided at the last minute not to bring my phone, even though I had bagged it in 3 Ziploc bags, because I have a feeling that because I was in the water for a period of time struggling to get back up on the stand-up paddleboard, that it would have gotten waterlogged and I would have had to put it in rice. So I'm really glad that Chris had the watch, and so maybe you consider getting a really inexpensive watch if you do decide to go out. And that's about it. That's my experience. Now, I can tell you, when I looked at the map more closely after I got home, they had a very interesting system. I noticed that at the launch, they had a big green flag. And then this key indicates that if something's going on, like if there's weather coming or there's a small craft advisory or whatnot, they'll change the flag at Bay Venture Outfitters to indicate that you should look at the weather or maybe even come in. So if a thunderstorm rolls in, I'm pretty sure that they would probably change the flag, and you would have that indication that bad weather was coming. So I think that's rather nice. And I felt like they had really good customer service. So would I use them again? Yes. Would I probably go out to the deeper part of the Northeast River and not do the shallow part of the creek where they are actually located? Yes. They did have a porta potty on site that's locked, but that you can ask to get into. And there is a community park that we passed, and we noticed that there were people. This is the community park right here, right along the water, and there were people who had their dogs out at the park. There was a grill there, there was a pavilion there for shade, and there were people fishing from the park as well. So if you don't need to rent and you have your own stand-up paddleboard, kayak, canoe, whatever, that might be a good community park to launch your water vehicle from, and just go out and check out the Northeast River. Let me know if you've ever paddled on the Northeast River and what your experience was, and let me know if you're curious about my experience with stand-up paddleboards. If there's some question that you might have that I didn't answer, just put it in the comments below and I'll get back to you. So that was my experience at Bay Venture Outfitters, paddling, stand-up paddleboarding on the Northeast River. I'm glad I did it. I will do stand-up paddleboarding again, but I'm probably not going to purchase one. But it was certainly a fun day with Chris, and yeah, I do recommend it if you are curious about stand-up paddleboarding or even kayaking. So have safe travels, and thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.